Welcome back, class, to Lecture 6, Video 2, which is a continuation in our Learning Theory series. So, in Asher Vollmer's GDC talk, he outlined some constraints when it comes to tutorial design and how these can cause some conflict. You need to teach the player how to play it, but you also have to balance the teaching in such a way that you respect the player has some level of intelligence and can work out the game or puzzle for themselves. If the player does not feel comfortable with the experience, then they won't want to play. You also need to excite the player enough to keep them enticed to play. But these constraints lead to good and effective tutorials. So some of the key takeaways from that video are that you need to tell the player what to do. You need to teach them. So you need to give instructions in terms of identifying the goal. Don't simply highlight what to click with arrows. You need to stay out of the player's way. Many tutorials bore or frustrate us as they don't give us the freedom to explore and learn through play. You need to give the player a safe space. You need to comfort them. But some players will feel anxious, so make sure that they can fail and not be punished. You need to make the goals into puzzles. You need to excite the player. Don't simply dish out instructions. Use puzzles that communicate how the system works. So, do games need tutorials? Yes, all games need tutorials. Even in their simplest and most well understood forms, there's a need to consider how players will know what to do, and know when they're doing things well or badly. Understanding how to design, implement and test tutorials is therefore an important role of a level designer. This practice integrates the ideas that we discussed last week on user-centered design with learning theory. Learning theory simply means an understanding of how people learn and what drives them to learn. So here are a few examples of how you can integrate tutorials in your own work. There are context-relevant tutorials, which is the provision of instruction that is directly relevant to the immediate context. So for instance, in a football game, providing instruction on how best to execute a penalty kick at the time when the player has the means to put it into immediate practice. We've got didactic, which is direct instruction, typically through speech, text, or symbols. This is a bit like instructions in a manual. You're telling the player what to do. This is often seen as a heavy-handed approach to teaching players, as it breaks flow and creates a distinction between learning and action. But it can have uses. For instance, controls displayed in the pause menu. We have exploratory, which is the opposite of didactic. This approach implies that the player will be encouraged to learn what to do by providing them a space to experiment and fail. Within level design, this is a key approach for embedding learning in design. We're now going to talk a bit about learning and psychology. So if you're interested in diving into how psychology can impact the design of games, these two books are a great starting point. Whilst not games related, the processes and methods they cover can be applied in games, which I'll deconstruct in the following slides. These two books are Experiential Learning, Experiences as a Source of Learning and Development by David A. Kolb, and Finding Flow, The Psychology of Engagement with Everyday Life by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. So, in his book, Experiential Learning, David Kolb summarizes that the experiential learning process is as follows. Learning is the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. He goes on to stress the following about experiential learning. Experiential learning focuses on learning through adaptation rather than content or outcomes. Knowledge is a transformation process. It's continually created through experience. Learning transforms both subjective and objective experiences, and to understand learning, we must understand knowledge. Whilst we don't want to delve too deeply into educational theory, the point here is to understand the value that this theory has for level design, which is a process of designing spaces to be learned by players through their experience of play. So, for level design, the experiential learning cycle perhaps gives the most useful conceptual model of your player's learning experience. Firstly, a new experience of situation is encountered, or a reinterpretation of existing experience. Secondly, reviewing and reflecting on this experience, you are looking for inconsistencies between the experience and your understanding. 3. A new idea or modification of an existing idea is formed. And 4. The learner applies this idea to the world to see what happens. So, how exactly does this apply to level design? The most direct form of applying experiential learning to game design is in the development of serious games, where the player or student is learning something important. Good serious game design is all about embedding learning into the activities and experiences of a game level. When designing a serious game, you don't want to be delivering all the learning through text and speech, then simply adding interactivity. You have to take a more integrated approach. I'll embed a trailer for the game Dragonbox Elements below, which encourages children to learn about geometry through levels of geometric puzzles. But this example, and serious games in general, is also linking learning and level design too literally. I'm now going to assign you task 12. As we all know, all level design needs to consider player learning. This harks back to last week's discussion on bad user experience. Players shouldn't get lost or not understand what they have to do. Players will become engaged in an activity when they're learning and applying what they have learned to complete your game level. I'd like you to consider watching Let's Plays, particularly for first-time play experiences, and pay close attention to how players navigate and interact with levels. I'd like you to analyse these Let's Plays and see if you can identify the stages of the experiential learning cycle in action. I'll embed an example of a first-time player experience of Portal in the My Learning space. That concludes this video, and I'll see you in the next, where we unpack the concept of flow in games. Thanks very much.